I have been a truck driver for some time now, and I have experienced many things on the road. Some have stayed with me for years, while some will probably stay with me forever. One of these experiences will for sure stay with me until the day I die. I had been placed on a very long journey, taking a load 10 hours cross-county. There was nothing but dreadful music on the radio, and I was beginning to get tired. It had got dark some time ago and was now extremely late. I decided to call in for the night at the next motel I came across. I didn't even care if it was a bad one. I now really wish I had. I pulled up and looked around. The place looked awful. The paint was peeling off the walls, the windows were dirty, and there were multiple letters missing from the sign. The strangest part was that there were no cars in the parking lot. On any other occasion I'd have taken, that was a strong warning to stay away, but I'd been driving all day and did not have the energy to get back in the truck and drive somewhere else. I went over to the reception and there was no one there. I rang the bell and still no one came. I waited a few more minutes, repeatedly ringing the bell. Annoyed, I turned around and began to walk away, but then I heard a voice. I looked around to see an elderly man with very few teeth grinning at wildly. He welcomed me to the motel and asked me if he could be of assistance. I told him that I needed a room for the night and that I'd like a room with a view of my truck. I always ask this at quite motels. It just makes me feel more secure for some reason. He fumbled around for a bit and then threw me a key with a room number on it. I paid him up front because I'd be setting off early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard him say in a muffled tone, "You have a great night's sleep." He then chuckled to himself quietly. This should have creeped me out, but I was far too exhausted to care. The first thing I noticed when I entered my room was that it was not facing my truck, like I'd asked. Instead, just the dumpsters on the other side of the building. The bed was comfy and the room was big, but I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. There were stains on the carpet, dark stains. The walls were covered in marks and there was something in a plastic bin bag in the bath. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. I lifted the top to see in and I was almost sick. Inside was the head of a pig, not nicely severed like a butcher would do, but a deep, rough cut. This was absolutely disgusting, but as the walls were crawling with cockroaches anyway, I decided it best not to use the shower or the bath and drew the curtain across. I tried to forget about what I had seen. I awoke not to the sound of my alarm clock, but the sound of voices outside my room. It was 2 a.m. Who would be out of bed at that time? I just assumed it was another guest and tried to get back to sleep, but before I could, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. I flew out of bed and into the bathroom and immediately hid in the tub, trying to ignore the pig's head that lay next to me. The curtain was drawn across, but I could see a small amount through a moth-eaten hole in the curtain. I heard the door swing open and the sound of footsteps as someone entered the room. I peeked through the hole to see a man in a ski mask walk over to my bed. He had something in his hand. The man threw off the covers and cursed. I then heard the voice of the man from the reception whisper, "What's wrong?" The man in the ski mask responded, "He's not here. He must have left earlier than we thought he would." I then saw the man start leaving and a huge amount of relief washed over me. Then he stopped, turned around, and walked straight into the bathroom. It felt like my heart had stopped beating. I tried to flatten myself into the bottom of the tub, although I knew it wouldn't do much good. He stood there for a good few minutes. I then heard the man cough, spit something into the sink, and leave. When I was sure that they were gone, I got out, grabbed my bag, and left. I used the emergency exit at the side of the building. I ran round to my truck and got in, started the engine, and drove. As I was leaving, I saw someone in the window staring at me, grinning his nasty, toothless grin. I didn't look back and got out of there. I'd driven nearly 20 miles when I was pulled over by a highway patrolman. He asked me if I was aware my back doors were hanging open. I told him no and went to check it out. A large amount of my load had been stolen and many other boxes had been slashed open. I told the patrolman everything about the motel and what had happened to me. He shook his head in disbelief and told me something that made me gasp. That motel 20 miles up road? The owner died there 4 years ago and it's been abandoned ever since. From a young age, I was told to never talk to strangers, and throughout my childhood, I never did. However, in adult life, things change. There's more reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I started giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive, I saw a man at the side of the road with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place I was going. Usually, past a certain time, I would ignore it and continue my journey, but something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window, and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first I was hesitant. Then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold, very cold. Not the kind of cold when it's chilly outside, but the kind when someone has a fever. A wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face. He looked like he was in his late 50s, with a gray beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was, "Pleased to meet you," and got back onto the road. I decided it was best not to try and talk too much unless he talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy you'd want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside the bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound, metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger who is not particularly communicative, I put the radio on. But mine had stopped working last week, and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him from staring at me, I asked him, "What's in the bag?" I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke, although I knew for sure it wasn't. Throughout the journey, the rummaging got louder and louder, and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled, I began thinking of what to do. I could not go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. Then he stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had had enough and pulled into the side of the road. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" Once again, he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked if he'd mind checking it out while I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred, then got out of the truck and went around the back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my taillights staring after me with what looked like a smile spread across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood. I still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot, trying desperately to forget the man. Then I realized he had left his bag. Obviously, I couldn't help but look in it, but I wish I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device, from knives and shackles to ropes and bars. I then realized they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag in to the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on it, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, At the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of the registration, and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end, I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me. But I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business." Every small town has their fair share of local legends. They don't really travel past the borders of the town and most certainly never end up on the internet. But the locals can tell them by heart. I've heard a lot of them in my time as a truck driver, but none of them actually held any truth to them, except for one, the story of the ghoul. I heard it when I was traveling through South Dakota. I had stopped driving for the night as I was just too damn tired, and it was so humid out that my windshield started to fog up. I'd ended up in some tiny town called Aberrage, about an hour from Custer and 3 hours from where I needed to drop my shipment. When I say it was tiny, I mean it. There were about 15 buildings total, most of them houses. The remainder were a sole restaurant with a bar attached, one church, and a gas station. I didn't exactly trust the restaurant's quality, but I was starving, so I figured that I'd at least sit at the bar and order some sliders, if they had them. The door jingled as I walked in, and a mostly empty dining room greeted me. There were 3 total people in the building, from what I saw. There was the bartender, a bald, bearded man, who immediately gave me a quizzical look. The only other person at the bar was a young woman who was drinking a labelless beer and didn't even turn her head to look at me when I sat down. I was clearly the outlier here. I wasn't exactly welcome, and I felt it. Still, I picked up a menu and tapped the beer I wanted. When I took my first sip, she finally spoke. "I haven't seen you before?" Her voice was equal parts rough and soothing. I was startled, but I pride myself on being polite, so I turned to face her and tried to make small talk. "I'm not from around here. I'm just passing through." I figured. "What brings you in here?" "The appetite of a fucking horse, that's what. I've been on the road for 11 hours. She giggled. She wasn't bad looking, but wasn't exactly my type either, so I hoped she wouldn't confuse my jokes as flirting. "You're funny." I turned away for a moment to signal for another beer, then looked back at her. "I have my moments, at least." She looked at the bartender as he passed me my second pour and waited for him to take my order before she signaled to him. "Rico, should we do it?" He grunted and walked into the kitchen. She seemed to take that as a yes and excitedly looked at me. "We've got a tradition around here. Everyone who drinks at the bar has to tell a story. It's nothing crazy, but we only have 23 people living here, so we're always itching to hear something new. I'm not a very interesting person, all things considered. You would think I had some crazy stories after traveling around the country, but I really never left the road long enough to see stuff like that. Still, I wanted to put on a good show, so I decided to tell them a story about the first time I saw the ocean. As I munched on my onion rings, I tried to make it as fantastical as possible and admittedly embellished the details a bit. I'd never actually seen a killer whale before, but they didn't need to know that. By the looks of it, the woman was captivated with the story and sat there the whole time with her chin in her hands and her bright eyes trained on mine. I finished spinning my tail and turned back to face the bar, placing a 20 on the counter as a tip. I was about to say goodbye when the woman halted me with a slight smirk on her face. "You got a good speaking voice. Thanks for telling us your story. I want to tell you one too." I was dead tired, but my manners prevented me from refusing, so I smiled and signaled to her to continue. "It's the same one I tell everyone who comes through here, because it's the one that sticks with you the longest." I nearly jumped out of my chair when the bartender finally spoke. It wasn't even directed at me, but it caught me off guard. "The one about the ghoul again?" "Yes, sir, unless you got a better idea." He remained silent. She looked at me and began her story. The ghoul was a local ghost story about something that haunted people who passed through the town. It was a long, pale figure that would only speak one word at a time. It would start haunting someone once they heard its story and wouldn't stop until they were dead. I sat there relatively entertained as she described the ways that the ghoul would make people go missing, but I obviously wasn't buying it. But you want to know how you can be sure that the ghoul is after you? How's that? It makes you see stuff, man. Stuff that isn't really there. It'll make you see it, feel like it's real. To me, this story just sounded like a bad drug trip or an excuse to get me to stay in town. I was blinking in and out of consciousness when she finally finished and decided I'd head back to the motel before she decided that story time would continue. Well, I'm gonna call it a night. You folks have a good one. She stopped smiling and just blankly stared at me. I got up and walked towards the door, pushing it open with my foot. Hey, one question before you go. I sighed and turned around. I just wanted to go to bed. Yeah, what's up? You can see me, right? I wasn't sure if I'd heard her wrong, but what I'd heard was a weird-ass question indeed. Who was us? Her and the bartender? Of course I could see them. They were right there. She was starting to creep me out. Yeah? She took a sip of her drink and looked at the bartender before turning back towards me. Well, good night. My brow furrowed and I walked out the door. Whatever was going on with that woman, I wanted no part of it. She'd been pretty nice up to that point too. I have no idea where all of that suddenly came from. I wasn't exactly in the mood to ponder it further, so I began walking down the street towards the motel. As I walked, I thought about the story she told me. Why was that the story she told to people who passed through town? Some sort of scare you into staying tactic, like I guessed. Maybe? I wasn't sure. I unlocked the door to my room, and after brushing my teeth, tucked in for the night. I woke up to a knock at the door. I rubbed my eyes and groaned. I didn't feel well rested at all. I rolled over and grabbed my phone off the bedside table, squinting as the bright light hit my eyes. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. What someone could want at this hour, I had no idea, but I wasn't about to entertain it. I put my phone back and shut my eyes, hoping that whoever was there would go away. The second knock jolted out whatever grogginess I had left in my system. It was much louder than the last one, like someone had slapped the palm of their hand onto the door. I jumped out of the bed and laid on the floor, hoping that they wouldn't try the handle. I had to get to the door and lay against it. Whatever unsavory character was trying to open it was still pounding, and I didn't have confidence that the shitty motel door would hold. I crawled on my hands and knees to the other side of the room, and as my bare back pressed against the cool, scratched wood, the pounding suddenly stopped. I was horrified that I would hear the handle turn or feel the door give out from behind me after a kick, but none of that happened. Instead, I hear shuffling from behind the door, which gave way to a single word breaking the silence. Open. It was no louder than a whisper, but in the deafening silence, I heard it clearly. My heart sank, and I tried to process what I'd just heard. It didn't sound like anyone I knew, obviously, but it also didn't really sound either male or female. I tried my best not to move and held my breath. Please, open. Every hushed word pumped a dose of adrenaline directly into my system. Whoever was out there was either sincerely in need of help or trying to coax me to open the door so they could do God knows what. I had to stay put. If I went to grab my phone, I was afraid that the door would fly open and I'd have to face whoever it was. I sat there for what felt like hours. As I was starting to fall asleep again, much to my dismay, I heard footsteps walking away from the door. I inched away from the door as they got quieter and was almost at the bedside table when I looked up. The bathroom door, which was open before I went to bed, was now closed. I froze, unsure of what to do. When the pounding started from the other side of that door, I shot up, grabbed my phone and keys, and sprinted towards the bedroom door. As I flung the door open, I heard heavy footsteps not far behind me, along with the familiar voice. No. It kept repeating it so calmly, following behind me. I bolted down the stairs, running through the parking lot towards my truck. As I jumped into the driver's seat, I felt something hit the door. I didn't want to turn, I didn't want to look, but I did. Standing outside of my door was a twisted face. The eyes were the size of baseballs and were peeled open, fixed directly on me. The mouth hung open as if the jaw couldn't close at all. It didn't have a nose or ears or any other features on its face. We sat looking at each other for what was most likely seconds, but may as well have been eons. Without moving its gaping mouth, it spoke, "See me." By this point, I'd pieced together what was happening and jammed the keys into the ignition. I floored it onto the road and didn't breathe until the town was nothing but a faint light in the distance. I was exhausted and could barely keep my eyes open. I yawned and slapped myself on the cheek in an attempt to wake myself up, but could feel myself drifting off. But I was feeling something else too, a sense of dread, right in the pit of my stomach. Taking my eyes off the road, I cautiously turned my head to the left. It was still there. Its head was directly centered in my window now, smiling at me. I swallowed the urge to scream and look back at the road. It couldn't get in and couldn't affect me if I didn't look at it, but what it could do was talk, in its low, haunting voice, punctuated with guttural growling. "You see me?" It repeated that for hours. I'd almost forgotten what silence was like by the time the sun rose. As the dawn broke and the light began to fill my eyes once again, it went quiet, and only the sound of my tires traversing the bumpy road remained. I looked to the left and saw trees through my window. Nothing was blocking it anymore. I arrived in Dupree shortly after and didn't even help the factory workers unload the shipment. I just sat in the driver's seat smoking a cigarette and thinking to myself, when someone knocked on my window, I nearly had a heart attack. It was the factory supervisor who I'd called to sign off on the product. "You doing okay? A couple of my guys said you didn't look so hot." I cleared my throat and put my cigarette out in the ashtray. I looked over at him and managed to smile. "Yeah, I'm all right. Long night though. Barely got any sleep. Had to leave at 3 a.m. 3 o'clock in the morning. How far away were you that you just now got here?" I opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel, holding my clipboard. It felt good to make small talk after what I'd been through. I was up in Aberage. Odd little town for sure. Aberage? I've never heard of it. I looked at him, expecting him to be kidding me. His brow was furrowed and he looked concerned for me, if anything. I pulled out my phone and showed him my delivery tracking app, which had marked where I'd stopped for the night. "It's right about here." He looked away from the phone and at me, with serious concern on his face now. "I've been hunting out there. There's nothing there but woods for miles." Being a trucker means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change, and constant change means constant danger. This was something I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then, I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But hell was I wrong. I'd crossed the state border a while ago and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anyone else on the roads for miles, and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck rolled a few more meters, then came to a halt. I just sat there for a minute, confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention, and thinking about it, I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I span round real fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s, with graying hair and a mustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you've run out of gas," he croaked, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd fine and started to walk back towards the truck. "I got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here at this location at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and I didn't need any help. I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this man to go away. I saw him walk off into the tree line and disappear. I called my boss and he said he'd sent someone out to tow me, but they might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the man gone. I woke up sometime later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that someone had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up, but maybe they tried. I'm a deep sleeper and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to work out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted round to the tower, "Where are we going?" Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage? After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn we seemed to be heading towards. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said the tower wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at, "Why boss? Then who the hell is towing me?" "Nine!" My boss called the police and told me to try and get out of the vehicle. I didn't need telling twice, swung open the door and jumped out. I was winded and lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped. The tower must have heard the sound of the door. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized the face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking fast now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer, calling, "Turn yourself in and it'll be quick." I couldn't move anymore now. He would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log, looked around, and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away and looking right at me. I bolted for the truck and made it underneath, the sound of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run, and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the wood. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all of their questions and told them about the barn I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When asking what they found, I was told that it was best I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in the truck. However, I do know one thing. That man is still on the loose, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. This happened a few years back. I was doing long-haul, cross-country roads, the kind that take you through vast stretches of nothing. You know the ones, where the radio turns to static for hours, and the only sign of life is the occasional pair of headlights going the other way, miles apart. The route I was on took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway that ran between the borders of 2 large governmental territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but think big empty spaces, lots of trees, not much else. It was notorious among drivers for being a dead zone, no signal, no towns for 100 miles either side, and prone to weird weather. Most guys tried to hit it during daylight, but schedules are schedules. Mine had me crossing it deep in the night. I remember the feeling. Utter blackness outside the sweep of my headlights. The kind of dark that feels like it's pressing in on the cab. The only sounds were the drone of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air brakes now and then, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt. Hypnotic. Too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours, with a short break a few states back. Coffee was wearing off. The dashboard lights were a dull green glow, comforting in a way, but also making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached. you fight it, Slap your face, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, crank up whatever music you can find that hasn't dissolved into static. I was doing all of that. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I was in that weird state where you're not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. Like your brain is running on low power mode. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, stretching and warping. Standard fatigue stuff. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of my headlights on the right shoulder of the road. Small, low to the ground. For a split second, I registered a shape, vaguely human-like, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as I passed. My first thought, deer, or a coyote. Common enough, but it hadn't moved like an animal. It had been upright. My brain, sluggish as it was, tried to process it. Too small for an adult. Too still for an animal startled by a rig. Then, the logical part, the part that was still trying to keep me safe on the road, chimed in. You're tired. Seeing things happens. And I almost accepted that. I really did. Shook my head, took a swig of lukewarm water from the bottle beside me, kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The image, though, it kind of stuck. A small, upright shape, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here, middle of nowhere, middle of the night. Impossible. Kids don't just wander around on interterritorial highways at 3 a.m. It had to be a trick of the light, a bush, my eyes playing games. I've seen weirder things born of exhaustion. Shadows that dance, trees that look like figures. It's part of the job when you're pushing limits. I drove on for maybe another 30 seconds, the image fading, my rational mind starting to win. Just a figment. Then I glanced at my passenger side mirror. Habit, always checking. And my blood went cold. Not just cold, it felt like it turned to slush. There, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my trailer lights receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure, standing on the shoulder of the road, exactly where I'd thought I'd seen something. It wasn't a bush, it wasn't a shadow, it was small, and it was definitely standing there, unmoving, as my truck pulled further and further away. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue, this was real. There was someone, something back there, and it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed at me, danger, wrong, keep going. But another voice, the one that makes us human, I suppose, whispered something else. A kid? Alone out here? What if they're hurt? Lost. I fought with myself for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. The image in the mirror was getting smaller, fainter. If I didn't act now, they'd be lost to the darkness again. God, the thought of leaving a child out there, if that's what it was. Against my better judgment, against that primal urge to just floor it, I made a decision. I slowed the rig, the air brakes hissing like angry snakes, pulled over to the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest, put on my hazards, their rhythmic flashing cutting into the oppressive blackness. Then I did what you're never supposed to do with a full trailer on a narrow shoulder. I started to reverse. Slowly, carefully, my eyes flicking between the mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to relocate that tiny figure. The crunch of gravel under the tires sounded unnaturally loud. It took a minute, maybe 2, but it felt like an hour. The red glow of my taillights eventually washed over the spot again. And there it was, a kid. I stopped the truck so my cab was roughly alongside them, maybe 10 feet away. Switched on the high beams, hoping to get a better look, and also to make myself clearly visible as just a truck, not something else. The kid was small, really small. I'd guess maybe 6, 7 years old. Hard to tell in the glare. They were just standing there on the very edge of the gravel shoulder, right where the trees began. The woods pressed in close on this stretch of road, tall, dark pines and dense undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my lights. The kid wasn't looking at me. They were facing sort of parallel to the road, just walking slowly, like they were on a stroll, completely oblivious to the massive 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside them, engine rumbling, lights blazing. They were wearing what looked like pajamas, thin, light-colored pajamas, in the chill of the night. No coat, no shoes that I could see. My mind reeled. This was wrong. So many levels of wrong. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, amplifying the crickets, the rustle of leaves in the woods from a breeze I couldn't feel in the cab. My heart was still thumping, a weird mix of fear and adrenaline and a dawning sense of responsibility.